Good evening, everyone. Welcome to UFC Casuals, our first episode. We're about hours away from UFC 284 kicking off. We have a fight between the top two pound for pound fighters in the world. We're here to tell you all about it. But before we get into that, this is our first episode, so me and Andrew want to tell you guys about how we became UFC fans and why we're doing this. Andrew, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, man. So I can remember, like, at a very young age getting into UFC. I can remember, like, watching the Anderson Silvas and Rampage Jacksons of the world fight on, like, free TV and, like, CBS. I remember, I think it was on. And I was a big casual back then. I didn't buy pay-per-views, but hence the name casuals, right? But I didn't really truly get into it until probably 3 years ago, like when COVID happened. I really started caring. Like, I was a casual, I would watch the McGregor pay-per-views, whatever. But in terms of actually watching every fight on a card, I probably didn't start till COVID, and I really got into it because nothing else was happening. I want to say the UFC was like one of the first sports to start back.
Mm-hmm.
So I just really got into it, and I've been enjoying it ever since. And yeah, how about you, man?
For me, you're the reason I'm in the UFC now. First card I really watched, or the main card I watched front to back was UFC 275, the Glover and Yuri title fight at light heavyweight. Your boy Yuri obviously got the submission. That card was stacked, though. It had so many good fights. It was a great first card to watch. And since then, I've been following it pretty closely. I've been a pretty big UFC fan now. I've been keeping up with it a lot. Watched almost every pay per view, I think. And yeah, so that's where we're at now. So we won't waste any more time. We'll get right into the coverage of 284, Islam versus Volk, the biggest fight of the year so far. You got Islam, who's a world class wrestler. Obviously, he's got a significant size advantage over Volk, and he's the clear betting favorite. And then Volk, a little bit, arguably a better striker. He's insanely tough. And he has, surprisingly enough, he has a reach advantage over Islam. So what do you make of this fight?
Very surprisingly a reach advantage for Volk because, I mean, like you said, he's 5 inches shorter than Islam. And
Mm.
like you said, is a big wrestler. I would definitely say, you said the striking's a little close. I would have to disagree. I think it's night and day. Volk is a better striker.
I don't want to jinx it, man. I don't want to jinx it because the next thing I know, Islam's gonna knock out Volk, and I'm gonna be
He's talking like he wants to knock Volk out.
sick.
I don't see it because at the end of the day, we know that wrestling prowess for Islam is his main asset, and I just think I don't see a way in which this doesn't go to the ground tonight because it's going to be Islam's it's his bread and butter, right? It is his bread and butter. It's the way he's going to look to win. He can say he wants to knock out Volk all he wants, right? But once Volk starts showing that speed in the striking with those hands, and he catches Islam once or twice, man, I don't know. Is
Mhm.
it going to shoot for those legs? We'll see.
Do you think Volk has enough power? Do you think he can take out Islam? Do you think he can knock him out, or do you think he'll have to win by decision?
I mean, Islam's one loss in his career. He did get caught by a
Yep.
overhand. We know this, right? He
Hmm.
pretty much he got slept, right?
He did. He wasn't out cold though. I think if
I
he
think
might have been able to save it, but he got caught.
I think it was a good stoppage, and
It was.
it was. And I
Yeah,
mean, you
I won't.
Steve and the coaches over on the side just completely stunned that a deck knocked out because that doesn't happen. But
Yeah.
I think from that point forward, right, Islam, his striking's gotten better. His wrestling, I mean, has it gotten better? We don't know. He's just always been elite, right?
Hmm.
And he's been an absolutely dominant fighter since. And he really should have probably been champion for longer than he has.
Hmm.
Nobody
Well,
to fight him.
yeah, too bad they're scared to fight him, or else he'd be here quicker. Um, yeah, I don't see. I think this fight will either end in a submission for Islam, or it's going to go to decision. I suppose Bolt could catch him, but I think Islam will be ready for that. I think he knows what he needs to do to win this fight. He'll try and keep it on the ground as long as he can, and if it stays on the ground for 3 rounds or for the better half of 3 rounds, I don't see how Islam loses this fight. My prediction on it, I think he's going to win by decision. He's a better wrestler. He's got a significant size advantage. I don't think Volk will get subbed. I think he'll avoid that, but I think the wrestling for Islam gives him the win.
The big rugby neck. I don't
Yeah.
we really think he can get called in the choke. I mean, we know this of Islam. I mean, see what he did. You see that shoulder flexing on Charles' neck, right? But I mean, is it enough to get a sub over Alexander Volkanovski, who we saw that guillotine that Brian Ortega had him in? This man's
and the triangle, and the triangle,
and the triangle, and the
and he
triangle.
got out of all of it. Yeah,
At the same round too. It was two
it
subs.
was shortly after. Yeah, it didn't take too long for him to get him in that triangle, but he got out of that as well and just went straight to ground and pound against Ortega.
But could we see something similar to that tonight?
We could. I mean, if
Looks
Volk,
hard for a sub,
mm-hmm.
so hard for a sub that I'm not going to say he tires himself out, but for that brief 30-second to a minute period that he's trying to sink in a submission, is he going to tire himself out in that moment? And Volkanovski's going to take advantage and maybe win some wrestling exchanges.
That's possible. That's possible. What is your prediction? I want to get your prediction on it.
Ooh, okay. So your pick was Islam by decision, right?
Yeah.
So you're picking Islam by decision. I think. Oh man, I like Volk. He's been on an amazing run. He hasn't lost in the UFC, man.
Not yet. No, his only loss was to some dude in some Australian league where he was like a foot shorter than the guy.
I mean, this guy has not even been in MMA for that. I mean, I say not for that long, but as opposed to Islam, who's been training since he was a literal child, right?
Yeah.
Volk, got into the game a little late, and he's absolutely dominated everybody in his path. I mean, who goes undefeated in the UFC like this on a run like this? There's a reason he's number one pound for pound in the world, and I cannot discredit him. But that being said, he is moving up in weight. He is much smaller, and Islam, I think, is the best fighter in the world.
That's fair. That's fair. You love the Dagestan guys.
The Dagestanis, man. I was a big Habib guy, and I'm a big Islam guy because at the end of the day, I think Islam is going to get the takedowns, and I think he's going to be stronger than Volk, and I think he subs him. I do.
Really? Okay. What round are you predicting it in?
I think
to get the sub
in 3 or 4.
3 or 4. Okay. All right. So a little bit later.
I think he wears him down with his wrestling, man. I do.
Okay. Fair enough. The betting odds, Islam, he is a minus 430 favorite, the clear favorite in this fight. Volk, he's plus 285 underdog. All these odds are on DraftKings. The most likely winning method, as you mentioned, it's Islam by submission at plus 140. Islam to win by decision, that's plus 215, and Volk to win by decision is plus 600. So if you think Volk has a shot in this fight, you might as well throw a couple bucks on it. There's a chance you can get a solid payout because of how heavy of an underdog he is. But yeah, both of our predictions, we both got Islam winning this one. As much as I like Volk, I'm going to be rooting for him tonight, but I think Islam gets it done. So
I think an
now,
go
ahead.
I was talking about how big Volk's neck is, I think maybe the submission will have to be like an armbar or something because I don't see a way in which, I mean, did we see that guillotine, man?
It was tight. It was so tight. I mean, you couldn't have asked for it better, too.
He doesn't tap and he doesn't go to sleep.
Nope.
Islam might have to break his arm in a Kimura or an armbar. We might see a broken arm. I don't know.
Hopefully not. I'd like to see, even if Volk loses, I'd like to see him get back to it soon.
Sure.
So another question. Where does Volk stand in the GOAT conversation if he pulls off this massive upset tonight and becomes a double champ? I mean, he's got to be up there if that happens.
The 4th double champ, 5th, right?
I think he'd be the 5th.
He'll be the 5th double champ in UFC history. And one thing about double champs in the past is they haven't really simultaneously defended both belts, right? Like when one would go up to a higher weight class, they would stay at that higher weight class because they didn't feel like cutting the weight anymore.
Yeah.
Volk is so small that I don't think he really has an issue getting to 145. And so I think he can fluctuate going back and forth defending both belts. And if he can do that, I think if he wins tonight, he's already close to GOAT. I mean, that is an amazing 5th person in UFC history to do it if he does. But if he can defend both belts simultaneously and stay the double champ for what, like even a year, he's the GOAT.
Yeah, that's fair. I think after this fight, if just off this fight alone, if he wins, I think he's in the top 3 conversation. Obviously, I don't want to put him above John Jones yet, but I think he, catapults up to that top 3 level. But yeah, if he can defend that for, like you said, about a year, I mean, he'll come back down probably and then fight the winner of Emmett versus Rodriguez. And he'll defend, or he'll try and win that belt, or he'll defend that belt. I guess he doesn't want to give it up to the interim champ, and then he can move back up and keep fighting at lightweight. So
Fight.
if he can do that, yeah, I think he has a solid case for being the GOAT. But I don't want to get too ahead. I don't want to
Well,
look a year in the future.
let's see what John Jones does in a month.
Yeah, he can become a champ at 2 different weight classes, not at the same time, but he could win one at light heavyweight, come back and win at heavyweight.
Two
So
biggest discrepancy weight divisions too. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
205 all the way up to what I bet he weighs like 240 now.
yeah. And I don't know how much Gane weighs, but it'll be a lot more than the light heavyweights he fought. So moving on, though, we got Emmett versus Rodriguez as the co-main event, a 5-round fight for the interim belt. Where do you see this fight going?
Where do I see the fight going? I think it's
go ahead.
a war on the feet. I think this is definitely a kickboxing fight. Yair does not want this to go to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't. I don't think he would. It's not necessarily that he would be uncomfortable if it went to the ground. I just think his quote unquote bread and butter, like I said earlier, is the striking game. And I think he showed some great class striking against Max Holloway a couple fights ago.
Mm.
Fortunately, we didn't get to see all of that striking in a full performance against Brian Ortega's last fight with the injury in the first round. But I think this is a war on the feet, just like every other Yair Rodriguez fight, personally.
Well, Emmett, he has that knockout power. He has crazy power, more than Yair. But I think Yair is a better striker, more technically sound. I don't think Yair is going to knock him out. I do think he wins this fight by decision. I'm going with the decision victory for both the main events. How do you have this fight ending?
Like you said, the power advantage is for Josh Emmett, right?
Mm-hmm.
We haven't even really broken down Josh Emmett as a fighter,
Yeah.
Listen, he arguably lost his last fight
to
Calvin Kattar. He got outclassed on the feet, in my opinion, by Calvin Kattar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Yair Rodriguez is a better striker than Calvin Kattar. So with that being said, I don't really see a way in which Yair Rodriguez doesn't outclass Josh Emmett on the feet tonight.
Mm-hmm. Now, another thing you had mentioned, we had talked off camera. What do you make of this fight for the interim belt? I know these guys, it's debatable whether or not these guys deserve to be the ones fighting for the interim belt.
Yeah, that's the problem with featherweight right now is the top 5 have kind of, you can almost say they've been inactive.
Yeah.
I mean, Yair Rodriguez is fighting once a year max, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and his last performance was in the summertime, right, against Brian Ortega, and he won by an injury. Like, he didn't really show enough, in my opinion, to warrant getting a belt wrapped around his waist tonight if he wins. You know what I mean? And that's no shade to him as a fighter. Great fighter. I think he would easily become the number 1 contender and fight for the title someday.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think, to me, this is just a fight night main event that they threw in as an interim title fight.
Yeah, and I think we had talked about it off camera about how this should have been a fight maybe for the number 1 contender spot rather than the interim belt. I think that would have made more sense.
But that being said, them saying it is an interim title fight is a way of saying it's the number 1 contender fight.
Yeah.
But why do we need a belt in the process?
Mm-hmm.
They could have just made this a 5-round co-main event.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody would have complained,
Yeah, I don't think it would have lost too many pay-per-view sales.
Yeah.
So another thing on the topic of 284 is the lack of promotion for this fight. You've got the 2 best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. The order of them might switch after tonight, but regardless, these are the top 2. This should be something that gets a lot more coverage by the UFC. Instead, all I'm seeing on social media is slap boxing, which is
power.
That's a whole other discussion. Yeah, power slap, whatever that was. So what's the deal with this not being promoted more? What do you think? What do you make of that?
I don't think Dana likes Islam. I don't know what his problem would be with Islam. Islam has taken time to learn English. He's actually pretty good at English. So that can't be a problem with Dana, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen Dana complain in the past, like, oh, this fighter isn't a draw because he doesn't speak English,
Yeah.
Islam's taking the time to learn it,
That's fair.
He's calling people out. He called out Volk in the cage after beating Charles Oliveira.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doing everything the promoter asks you to do, like call people out, try to set up super fights. And this is a super fight.
Yep.
Best fight right now the UFC can make, number one, number two, in number one's home country.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be 50,000 fans in Australia going, ape shit for Alexander Volkanovski, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually an interesting thing I want to point out is this is in Australia. And I think, how is Islam going to react? I know he's a very calm fighter. He's very composed. Mm-hmm. I just think that could play a factor in the main event, right? I don't know what Dana's problem is with these two fighters, but he is not promoting this fight at all.
No, not nearly enough. On the topic of fans in Perth, I saw something online that there was a post. I'm not on 4chan, but someone had talked about it on another site. They said that a fan was going to try and sneak in a laser pointer into the crowd and try and blind Islam. Do you know anything about that? Have you heard about that?
I have not heard about that. No.
It's ridiculous. I'll send it to you later, but there was this post online about a guy who was going to use an asthma needle or whatever. I don't know what they use, but he was going to use that to sneak in a laser pointer and try and blind Islam because he's Australian. He's an Australian and he wants Volk to win. So
yeah,
whatever it takes, I guess.
I was thinking about this yesterday. I was like, man, in Australia, right? I bet Tai Tuivasa is going to be there.
Yeah.
Imagine the amount of shoeies that are going to be happening during like every Australian fighter's walkout.
Can't imagine.
Like, I know, these fighters are calm and composed, right? But it has to play a factor if you're the away guy coming into that, territory.
Mm-hmm.
I know the co-main doesn't have an Australian, but that main event, a lot of other fights on that main card have Australian fighters, and that's going to be a big factor in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it can hurt some fighters. I think it can damage their morale a little bit, but I also think it can fuel them. Like some of them might come out hoping to ruin some nights, you know what I mean? To knock out some Australians. That might be their goal, and it might help them a little bit even going into enemy territory. So, yeah, I get that. I get that these guys aren't super marketable. I know they're not like super popular names amongst casual fans and stuff. They're not McGregor. They're not John Jones. So it's they're not going to get that many pay-per-view sales. But I mean, like you said, these are the two best fighters in the world right now. There's no excuse for this fight not being promoted more. And I kind of wish this card would have been a little bit more stacked.
Number one and number two.
Number one and number two. No excuses, Dana. No excuses.
And the fact that I've seen more advertisement for Power Slap on TBS.
Yeah.
On Dana White's Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Number one versus number two, UFC. Like, this is the biggest fight you can make, and he's not promoting it.
It doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. So we were going to talk about the weight cutting at 284 and them interviewing the fighters after their weight cuts or their weigh-ins. I saw you sent me the picture of Josh Emmett. His cheeks were all sunken in. It looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks. He looked like McGregor when he was cutting down to featherweight. That's what I made of it. And what do you think of the fighters being interviewed right after weigh-ins when they really need to get some water in their bodies and
they need to get prime hydration?
Yeah.
This new I found it very ironic that, these guys are on this scale, like sucking in all this weight and they're like dying, cutting 25 pounds, and they just have like a big prime hydration spot, on the scale.
Sponsored by Prime, baby. Makes you look like this.
Hey, now. Hey. Boom.
Yeah, maybe they don't want to put Prime right above them until, they put on some weight again because they look like ghouls out there.
I just think with the weight cutting, it's a problem in MMA altogether,
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary. And I mean, I was talking about, like, I looked up Josh Emmett's weight out of camp, right? Like when he's not training. And this man weighs 180 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is cutting 35 pounds to fight for a title tonight. I mean, and you can see the guy's face. Like, it looked like he had, like you said, he hadn't eaten in days. I mean, when's the last time this guy got some water in his body? It's scary.
Mm-hmm. It is. And the thing about the UFC with how it's still a pretty young sport and comparative to other ones. We don't know what the long term effects of stuff like that will be. So that's and it is scary. It's a little bit disturbing to think about.
Imagine what these guys' kidneys are going to look like when they're 50.
Yeah, I don't even want to think about that. That would
Think
hurt to
about
just think about.
the kidney stones, man.
I don't even want to think about that. That's yeah, that's ugh.
These guys are going to be pissing basketballs.
Yeah, there's boulders coming out. It's gonna be rough. So, but yeah, that's definitely a concern. But yeah, that kind of wraps up what we were going to talk about with 284. Looking forward, we've got an incredible year of UFC. Just within the next few months, we got Cyril Gane versus John Jones in March. Also in March, we got the trilogy of Edwards versus Usman, and then in April we have Pereira versus Adesanya 2. Some would call it the fourth fight. I'm going to call it second because I'm an Izzy fan. Um, and then after that, later on in the year, we have McGregor versus Chandler. That'll happen after the Ultimate Fighter. So, what are you looking forward to with Jones versus Gane? What's your call on that? I know it's a little bit early, but how do you
Yeah,
think that fight's going to go?
get more into that fight, when the time comes in a few weeks. But
Hmm.
I think I'm just super excited to see how John Jones translates to heavyweight.
Hmm.
Putting on all that weight, will he be slower? Because one of John Jones' biggest assets was his speed.
Hmm.
And his wrestling, of course.
Yeah.
In my opinion, that's what's going to win him that fight if he does win.
Hmm.
Is that wrestling, in my opinion? But I will definitely be interested to see in the striking if he wants to strike with Cyril Gane, because
Yeah.
that's scary. You know,
Well, yeah, he hasn't fought heavyweight, and he hasn't fought someone with the power of a heavyweight fighter. And Gane, he's one of the most, you know, agile heavyweights out there. I mean, he can move way different than any other heavyweights can. He may not have the power of a guy like Ngannou, but the way he moves is different from anything you've seen in that weight class. So that I wonder if that'll cause trouble for Jones, and if his quickness will take a hit because of how much weight he's putting on. But he still has that fight IQ. I mean, his technique is incredible. I see him winning that fight, but the odds are pretty close on DraftKings and all types of sports books. So it'll be close. I think it won't be a John Jones domination like some people anticipate just because of the name factor of John Jones.
right? Well, the casual fan will obviously see John Jones and think this man has never lost.
Yeah.
But you also have to take into account he's been very inactive.
Hmm.
He hasn't fought in what 2 3 years.
It's pushing up on 3 years, I think.
And when he did fight, you can argue that he lost to Dominic Reyes.
Hmm.
We've now seen can't beat anybody.
Yeah.
So I'm not sitting here and saying John Jones is washed by any means,
Yeah. I
but
get you.
inactivity matters, and this could be a tougher fight for John Jones than people think, and we don't know how that weight's going to translate.
Hmm. Moving on, we got Edwards and Usman also in March, just 2 weeks after the Gane versus Jones fight. So we're gonna get a good back-to-back couple weeks, and then we got some more fights to follow. But right now, Edwards versus Usman 3, the trilogy. How do you think this one will go? My prediction, I think Usman's just gonna wrestle him. I don't think he's gonna risk getting knocked out again. There's no way he does that. I think Usman's gonna dominate on the ground, and it'll be just a wrestle match.
Do you think some of that pride in himself will take over? Like, I got to get this one back.
It might, but you can't. Ah, man, Edwards is just such a good striker, and he's already been dropped by him before. If he loses again, what's the next step for Usman? That's the thing. He's got to win this fight.
Because he's already said there is no possibility of him ever going up to middleweight,
Hmm.
which, in my opinion, he should have done 3 fights ago, and this Edwards thing would have never even happened.
Yeah.
But he refuses to fight his Nigerian brethren, Mr. Yasan.
Well, he may not even have to fight him if he's not the champ,
Yeah,
and
both get
yeah,
knocked. So
that's yet to be seen.
I think my brain is telling me you're right,
Hmm.
with this. He's going to wrestle him because he proved that he can take Edwards down quite easily.
Yeah.
He won 3 rounds of that fight. He was winning the fifth too, right?
Hmm.
He was going to win 4-1 on every scorecard until the headshot from the heavens Rank
Headshot dead, pound for pound champ.
pound
Isn't
for
that what or Edwards said?
that is
That head kick was vicious. It was vicious. I don't think Usman's going to risk letting that happen again.
history. And one of the most important head kicks in UFC history because, like you said, Kamaru Usman, pound for pound number one. Which also makes me think tonight is number one versus number two. Number one could get slept. Number two could get slept, and they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Pay me
They
back.
don't care.
Screw the future. Tonight is a big night.
Big, not just a big night. It's a huge night. I mean, yeah, you said it. Pound for pound, 1 versus 2. This is talked about nowhere near enough. I don't know how it hasn't got the promotion it deserved, but man,
this is the best fight the UFC could make.
Yeah.
Islam called for it. He got it, and now the president isn't talking about it.
Shameful, Dana. Shameful.
Absolutely shameful. I'd like to get you in a power slap 1v1, Dana. Put me on TBS, and I'll smack you, silly bud.
Oh, man. Dana versus Andrew. Let's book it. Let's make it happen. Hey, Dana, I know you're watching. You heard the call out. Don't duck him.
That big is, man, on all those roids. I don't need roids.
Oh, man. Moving on, though, we got Pereira versus Adesanya in April. That's another great fight. A fight that I'm extremely nervous about as an Izzy fan. I'm hoping I don't think Adesanya is going to knock Pereira out. I know he got close at the end of round 1 of the last fight. Look, if he had 10 more seconds, I think he might have got it. But Pereira has just too much knockout power. I don't know. Adesanya's got to have a pretty much perfect fight if he wants to win this. He was doing great last fight. It was one of his best displays. But all it took was getting caught once by Pereira, and that was it.
All 3 of his fights against Alex Pereira have been
the story. Yep.
And then you get late in the fight, and you can get caught.
Mm-hmm. Well, Pereira was down in the rounds too, so he knew what he had to do. He knew he had to get the knockout, and he just walked him down, got him against the cage, and just teed off, and that was all she wrote.
I don't want to get walked down by Alex Pereira.
Yeah.
Most menacing fighter in the UFC, easily.
Well, with Ngannou out, he's definitely it. Yeah.
Yeah, true. I forgot about that freak of nature himself, but the mental factor has to play a part in this fight. It's going to.
Absolutely.
You lose 3 times to one man. Many people probably think you don't even deserve to fight him again.
Mm-hmm.
So to be able to get in there for a 4th time, knowing you've been knocked out by him twice, right? I know Izzy's your boy. And like you said, in that first round, he had him frozen like Elsa, right? Like you'd like to say, or
yeah, yep.
Elsa. But then Pereira had him frozen like Elsa and knocked him out. And
he did. And I know Izzy said it wasn't a good. Or he said I don't think he questioned the stoppage much, but he said he'd rather have kept going, see if he could have recovered from it. I don't think that would have gone well for him. I'm glad they stopped it. Realistically, he would have gotten just slept viciously. I would have been even more sad seeing that. But yeah, the mental aspects got to weigh on him in this next fight. I imagine it will. But he also he kept his head held high after the last fight. I think he's, regardless of how the rest of his career plays out, I think he's happy with what he's accomplished still. And I think that's a big reason why he's still as positive as he is and has that mindset. But yeah, going into that fight, I know it's going to weigh heavy on his mind, and it'll be interesting to see if he can overcome that and outlast Pereira, because I don't see him knocking him out unless he gets some like he did at the end of round 1. Maybe he does. Maybe he shocks me, but I think if Izzy beats Pereira ever, it'll be by decision.
I think you brought up a great point about Israel Adesanya as his career as a whole. I mean, this is a guy who's been hated on a lot for his past performances, and really the past 1 to 2 years, right?
Yeah.
He had an amazing run to even get to that UFC title, knocking out Derek Brunson, knocking out, Robert Whittaker.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he is arguably the best striker in the UFC. I mean, amazing.
Technically speaking, he doesn't have the most power, obviously. That's clear. But from a technical standpoint, he's so precise. He's so smart with how he fights. He's definitely one of the best, if not the best.
Yeah, and I just think you brought up a great point in that no matter what happens in this next fight, because if he loses, where do you go from there, right?
Yeah.
But he's done everything that he really wants to. He's defended that belt many times. He even tried to 205 and become double champ, right? Something that
Yeah.
every champion after a certain amount of time should try. Mr. Kamaru Usman refusing
Move up already.
I like Marty. I like, I actually don't, but I don't like
I
him.
respect the honesty. I respect the honesty with it.
I don't like him for that reason alone. I think he should have moved up and tried to fight Izzy. That would have been a super fight. It would have been.
Yeah, that would have been fun.
This would have been our fight tonight. That would have been number 1 versus number 2, and they never made it happen. So.
Yep.
I don't care about your Nigerian brotherhood or whatever. But back to Izzy. He's really done everything. He's tried to move up and become double champ. I think if he loses this fight, maybe you retire. Maybe. But even if you don't, there's nothing to be ashamed about of your career. And if he wins, he's right back to where he was before as kind of the face of the UFC, really. He'll finally have that win over this, guy
Kryptonite.
Can't beat.
Yep. Yeah, and he said it in the interviews after the fight. He said, the hunter has become the hunted, and I'd like to see him get back to how he was fighting when he was chasing that belt. You know what I mean? When he was fighting more aggressive, landing those knockout shots where he knocked out Costa, he knocked out Whitaker, all that stuff. You know what I mean? I'd like to see him get back to that. And if he knocked out Pereira, if he does it, I'm going to lose my mind. Wherever we're eating food at watching the fight, I'm going to be insufferable. I will be going crazy.
Yeah, we don't buy pay-per-views, by the way.
No, we go out and get a $15 burger or some wings and watch that. Saves us some money.
Yeah, screw you, Dana White. I'm not paying.
We're not giving you $60 or whatever you charge for it.
Yeah.
And if I am at home, I'm watching Streamies, and I'll shamelessly admit that.
I'm not giving you $60 for a fight you're not even going to promote.
Oh man. All right. Well, that's about the end of our script. It was good talking to you guys, Andrew. It was good having you on. Good first episode, I'd say. I think we got a quality conversation in there. So yeah, we will talk to you guys later. I had a great time, and yeah, that'll wrap it up. See you guys.